What's up, everyone? Scott the Trout Hammer here, and today we're going to teach you how to catch some slab-sized crappie. Crappie time. So when you're targeting crappie, you want to look for locations like this. I mean, this whole area I'm fishing, this kind of slough next to the river, is just one big flat. I think it might be like 3 or 4 feet deep in the middle. It's not very deep, but I know there's a lot of vegetation on the bottom all throughout here, and you have a old dock with some posts coming out of the water, and that's where I've been casting next to those posts. Crappie are going to hold to structure, especially during the time of day where the sun's out. They're gonna get around those pilings. They're gonna get around those underwater vegetation, and they're gonna hide in that vegetation, and they're gonna ambush their prey when it comes over or around where they're schooling up at. So locations like this, this location had a full dock. It'd be even better, a better place to target crappie. But this is the kind of place you look for when you're gonna target crappie. There we go. That's something decent. Oh yeah, now that is a crappie. Holy cow. Dang, guys, look at that thing. I got big meaty weightlifter hands, and look at that. That's a big old crappie. And that was on the jig that came in the Lucky Tackle box, the panfish box this last month. I want to see how much this one weighs. This might be my second best crappie ever. Yeah, right about half a pound. That is my second best. My best is 2 pounds. In this area, it's going to be kind of hard to top that. So when it comes to lure selection for fishing for crappie, you can really fish for crappie the same way you fish for trout. I mean, they're all panfish. Now, the definition of a panfish is any smaller fish species that will fit in a frying pan. I mean, that's where they get their name. So things like perch, red-tailed perch, like the surf perch that I caught with PK, trout are panfish, even kokanee are panfish because kokanee are about the size of large trout. Crappie, bluegill, you name it. You know, anything that fits in a frying pan, that is a panfish. And trout and smaller bass and crappie, you can fish for them really similar in terms of lure selection. So, you know, things like your spoons, brighter colors usually help with crappie. Same thing with spinners. You know, anything that has brighter color, and those marabou tails also really great for fishing for crappie. Probably the best lure. Best hard lure I've used for crappie are the Castmasters, because the swimming and kicking action on these and the flash they put off really draws in crappie for a bite effectively. But probably the best lures for fishing for crappie are the small plastics and the panfish lures that I've used plenty of times in other videos. So I mean, little tiny swim baits like that, or even up to, you know, bigger ones like this Strike King Mr. Crappie, which I took the skirt off of that. I found it actually worked better without the skirt. But even clubtail swim baits and curly tail swim baits work just fine. You know, curly tail swim baits like this work just fine. The idea is that the moving bait tends to draw the crappie in for a strike because they are a predatory species. They're feeding almost the exact same way and in the exact same places that bass are feeding. So they're going to want to chase prey, and also same rule applies with crappie that does apply for bass, is that bigger lure will draw a bigger fish. So I mean, you could use, you know, like big baits that have tail spins like that, coming in different sizes with, you know, different blades. Anything that's going to put off the flash like that and draw them in. Even crankbaits work really well for crappie, especially the smaller ones. You know, this mini rattle trap. Can't tell you how many panfish I've caught off that. And then also like miniature chatterbaits, but even full-size chatterbaits. So I have a friend that actually caught a giant crappie on a bass setup with a large chatterbait and a large swim bait on the end of it, and the fish choked the whole thing down. So I mean, they like the moving baits. Great way to draw them in for a strike. There we go. Feels like another decent fish. And a decent fish it is. That's another tank of a crappie. And that one comes courtesy of that Strike King Mr. Crappie jig-headed swim bait. Oh yeah, now that is a slab. That's slab crappie right there. That's gonna be delicious. Another amazing crappie lure are the Trout Magnet worms. For crappie in particular, because crappie, most of their diet is other fish. Actually, I think almost all of their diet is other fish. I haven't really looked into it, but these things that mimic small minnows, and when you treat this like a jerk bait, and you just twitch it in the water coming towards you, it looks like an injured baby fish. And I mean, even larger crappie are gonna go after a meal like that. There's a little crappie on that Trout Magnet worm. Didn't even have a nibble on that. He was just hungry. Probably the most common, or at least most traditional, lure to use for crappie are marabou-style jigs. And they're jigs that have that marabou feathering on them, and you use this under a bobber. And you set your depth with your bobber, and what happens is this just suspends in the water, and it looks like injured prey that the crappie see as an advantageous meal. But these marabou feathers in the water, these things spread out and move on their own, and that sort of lure drives crappie absolutely nuts. When they see that on something they consider to be food, they come up and hammer these things hard. Crappie are such a great summertime fish because, you know, nights like this, it's, you know, 8:15, and it's pleasant. There's a nice breeze. It's not too hot outside, but this is when crappie are really actively feeding. And in the summertime, they're more active than any other season, at least around here. So places like this, you know, this slough on the river, and some other places that eventually I'm going to go fishing at to fish for crappie, you'll see how active these fish are and how aggressive they can be, especially when you're using moving baits like these. You know, like I said earlier, you don't have to use just this one spot where I'm fishing as an example of like a location to target crappie. That's the kind of advice that's going to work pretty much anywhere. The advice I gave, where you look for structure, you look for spots that have some deeper holes that crappie can run down and escape to, because that's something else they'll consider cover. It'll help them feel safe. And in the summertime, the crappie are going to want those waters because they're going to be cooler, especially in the shade. And especially that's why they're going to be a lot more active times like this later at night. When the water temperature goes down a little, they'll be out and actively feeding a lot more. I mean, if you have a boat and you have equipment, you're going to find crappie a lot faster than a bank fisherman. But for us bank fishermen, you know, that's the best advice I can give on locating crappie. But of course, if you are a crappie fisherman, you know, things you definitely need to take with you every time you head out, something you definitely need as a staple in your tackle box, are curly tail grubs. I don't know what it is about the curly tail grubs, but something about that curly tail action in the water on a grub, just on a slow retrieve on the bottom, it just drives crappie nuts, and they come flying out of nowhere to hammer it. Yeah, on the old curly tail. There we go. decent sized one, but the only ones I'm going to keep are the ones that'll fill a frying pan. So we'll let this guy go. He'll get bigger, and we'll catch him later. And just like with bluegill, bait and bobber works really well fishing for crappie also, as long as you can find the area where the crappie are schooled up, and you can suspend your bait in that same level of the water column that the fish are schooled up in. I mean, they'll see that as easy food. They'll come up and pick that up. And the best thing to use is absolutely the power bait crappie nibbles. And if you haven't seen these before, I've used these plenty of times on the channel. These are my favorite bait. The crappie nibble from power bait is just this tiny marshmallow bait. It's real squishy. And what I do, and I actually learned to do this from crappie fishing because I saw how effective it was, and it also works for bass, bluegill, trout, what have you, is you take one of these crappie nibbles and you put it on the hook and you put it down back toward the bend of the hook, and it doesn't alter or ruin the action of the curly tail at all, but what it does is it provides scent in the water. That's just one more thing to appeal to a crappie. There's something good. Yeah, that's another decent crappie. On the big old curly tail. Oh man. That is a tank. Good grief. Yeah, I think that might be bigger than the first one. I'm going to weigh this one too. Wow, exactly the same size. So the most important thing when you're targeting crappie, when you're fishing for crappie, well, the two most important things are gear and technique. So you have to use the correct rod and correct line when fishing for crappie, because these crappie have really soft mouths, and if you just ram the hook home on a crappie, you're gonna rip the hook out of the fish's face. You're probably gonna rip the fish's face off. Or you're just going to, over and over again, lose bites, lose fish. You're not going to be able to set the hook on it. So what you want is you want a really, really light rod. An ultralight is best because this rod has a lot of give. I mean, look at the bend in that rod. And the idea is when you go to set the hook on a crappie, you don't jerk your rod up towards you or to the side to set the hook like you would a bass or really any other hard-mouthed fish. With a crappie, all you want to do is maintain reel tension, so when you feel the bite, don't stop reeling, just lift your rod up. That's going to set the hook just fine for you. You're not going to lose crappie that way, trust me. Another one. Pretty small one though. But I mean, did you guys see how I set the hook on that? I didn't like throw my rod up. I didn't jam the hook in the fish. All I did was raise the rod to my opposite shoulder. Oh wow, look at that. That fish just choked that lure down. I mean, you know guys, crappie are absolutely aggressive fish. I mean, look at the size of that lure and look at the size of the fish. And it had that thing almost down into its stomach by the time I set the hook on it. So I mean, these fish, they will attack some pretty large lures, some pretty large bait, and they're gonna chase stuff down that you wouldn't think you'd catch on something that big. Oh wow. Barely even did anything on that one. Didn't even have to set the hook, just started reeling. Okay guys, I mean, that's what I'm talking about. Look at the size of this crappie, or should I say lack thereof. And look at the size of lure I used. I mean, that lure is almost as long as the fish, and it took it. These guys are aggressive feeders. So when I go crappie fishing, the gear I usually bring with me is an ultralight. So this is just my 4.5 foot ultralight. I also have a 5.5 foot ultralight. Length really doesn't matter. The length really just depends on what size lure you're using. This is a pretty heavy lure, so this 4.5 foot ultralight casts it just fine. And this ultralight has 2-pound line on it. So this rod gives me a lot of control of the fish, even larger fish. The other rod that I'll bring, and it's for my larger lures that I use for the crappie, like I've got this 3-inch curly-tailed grub on a 1/8 ounce jig head is my 7-foot light rod. I mean, it's still plenty limber, still has plenty of play to it, just has a little bit more power and a little bit more length so I can cast the correct lure in the correct way. And on this I have 6-pound FluoroClear line. The 6-pound line and FluoroClear has enough stretch to it and enough invisibility with the crappie that it still presents a lure in a great way, and it gives me a lot of control of the fish and the lure when I use it. Oh, it's getting dark, getting late, but the fishing is so good. As I said. Yeah, another decent sized crappie, but you know, conservation method, we will only take the really big ones. So this one gets to live another day. And yeah, that's all for this video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like. Also, if you are a new viewer, please consider subscribing, because I do multiple videos a week where I teach different techniques, different rigging. I teach you how to target specific species, like this video here. I also do educational videos and unboxing videos for Lucky Tackle Box for my subscriptions that I get in the mail. Please share this video. If you guys had any questions or comments you'd like to leave, please leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer our questions. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys have anything else you want to add to crappie fishing too, I'd be happy to help spread the knowledge with you. And thank you for watching. And as always, tips up, tight lines, and have fun fishing.